T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good evening and happy early Thanksgiving to everybody here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network. Kush'S Korner, episode 38. Just a solo episode tonight. Going over a couple of topics. First things first, kind of in the spirit of the time of year. Just kind of giving thanks, being grateful for this hobby, the industry, the people involved, the animals, and kind of what it means to me and what I feel like I could probably speak for a lot of people on. As well as just kind of that starter, I'll be discussing how I feel one can best market a new project in the current era of the reptile industry. But before I get into all of that, as always, USARC. So USARC is the organization that is fighting for our rights to keep our reptiles, to run our reptile businesses, and to live this lifestyle that we all love so much. Check out usarc.org for all of the information you need to know about the organization. If you are not already a member, please look into becoming a member of USARC. As a community, we have strength in numbers, so the more people that are behind the cause, the better. And tonight we are brought to you by Elijah Armas of Juggernaut Reptiles, one of the leaders in the world of blood pythons and short-tailed pythons, working with some of the highest end individuals in the entire world. They are not only limited to those species, they also work with ball pythons, green anacondas, Sanzinia, and more. But primarily, if you are in the market for the blood and short-tailed pythons, I would definitely recommend checking out Juggernaut Reptiles. They have some of the best stuff in the industry. And we were also brought to you by SUNDOWN Reptiles. Brian Susan, a good friend of mine, somebody who I really look up to is in the industry in terms of how he runs his business and the high quality of animals he provides. Of course, he is one of the leaders in the the tree monitor world, the rare gecko world, Abronia, green tree pythons, amongst other things. If any of those pique your interest, please check out SUNDOWN Reptiles, sundownreptiles.com or SUNDOWN Reptiles on all forms of social media. And last but certainly not least, we are brought to you by the Reptile Super Show. The next Reptile Super Show is in Pomona, California, January 11th and 12th, coming up here in the not too distant future. I will be there. MJ will be there. We will be vending with a lot of very cool animals, but there are also going to be hundreds of other incredible vendors from not only the West Coast, but all over the US. Truly one of, if not the best reptile show in the entire country. If you are anywhere nearby, you have no excuse to miss it. But if you are anywhere else where you would be looking to travel for a reptile show, there is not one I could recommend higher than the Reptile Super Show. A lot of great people, a lot of great animals. Overall, really an incredible weekend. So once again, Pomona, California, the 11th and 12th of January. Check it out. Go to the website to check out all the information, how to get tickets, and hope to see as many of you there as possible. All right, here we are. Good evening, everybody. And thank you for tuning in. If you are here on YouTube and are not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe here to the Trap Talk Reptile Network on YouTube. There's a new podcast every single day of the week from some of the absolute best hosts in the game, covering a wide variety of topics. So if you are a fan of reptile-related podcast content, you have found the right place. For our audio people on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, wherever you get your podcasts, please subscribe there. Give us a 5-star review, share. All that good stuff is greatly, greatly appreciated, and helps out everybody here that is involved with the network. So yeah, I mean, Thanksgiving week, definitely a bit of a slower week over here. Probably a bit of a shorter episode tonight as well. But this is a good time to reflect. Anytime is really a good time to reflect, but this is the time of year that's emphasized for that. My life is completely invested into this. I don't know what my life would be without the reptile industry, without the animals. And truly, it's something that, I'm extremely grateful for on a day-to-day basis. But more than just the animals, it's really the community at large, outside of the animals. This is it's a kind of work where it can get very isolating, just spending time with animals. As much as we love it and we cherish the time spent with our animals, there's only so much of that you can do without the human interaction component of it as well. That's what's so great about podcasts, about reptile shows, about all of the stuff that's involved outside of the actual animals themselves. Like I said in the ad reads with the Pomona show coming up, that's something that I'm very much anticipating seeing a lot of people who I maybe get to see once or twice a year. And that's something that doesn't get to happen all that frequently. And to me, really kind of makes what we're doing here special. I know myself, many other people have found themselves in points of their life that are pretty low, pretty dark. And the animals and the industry have helped me and many others persevere through those times and come out on the other end a better person for it. And nothing else did it for me other than this. So for that, very, very grateful, as I imagine many other people are as well. So yeah, I mean, it's really a great place to be. It's not always perfect. There are some things that'll get frustrating, that make you feel down, whether that be drama within the industry, the ebbs and flows of the market. Could be a lot of things. Could be losing an animal, could be a project not working out the way you wanted it to. But at the end of the day, the amount of positivity that this brings to me, and I know many other people as well, is definitely more than worth it. So very grateful for absolutely everything and everybody who has been there for my journey. It's been awesome. So with all that said, also grateful for everybody who is tuned in right now or has been ever to my podcast. Just the fact alone that anyone wants to listen to me ramble is, very humbling. So with that said, let's get into the rambling for the night. So, whenever I plan on doing these solo episodes, I always want it to be about something that I think is actually useful and not me just blabbing on for an hour or two or however long these end up being. But one thing that I think really is an important topic these days, and something that isn't done properly a lot of the time, is in marketing of projects. So, in the past, marketing a new project wasn't particularly difficult. Especially when the industry was much more centered around shows, before the internet really took over, in an extreme way. A way that I, when I was younger, and a lot of other people learned about a new aspect of the industry, was places like Reptiles magazine. They would do a feature about a species or something like that, and through that article, you were learning about these animals, and you see in the pictures of them, and information like this was not quite as available as it is today, not nearly as. So something like that could be enough to pique your interest. Or seeing something at a reptile show where the breeder is bringing it for the specific show, has been hyping it up for a while, and that stands out as like the animal to see at that expo. Well, with the age of social media and YouTube and all this stuff, there's more visibility on all this stuff than there ever has been before. So those older methods are easily overlooked. Magazines and whatnot are not nearly as popular anymore. I mean, many of them aren't even print anymore. They're all online. And getting your projects, your animals in front of people is easier than it's ever been. But because of that, it's harder than it has ever been to actually stand out. So I made a little notes for myself. I'll be peeking at periodically. So for marketing a new project, the very basis of it, which I think goes without saying, but should be said, is it needs to be something that you really, really deeply care about and believe in. Many people, particularly with ball pythons, I'm not going to try to harp on ball pythons too much tonight, but it's a great example to use. They get into it because somebody else pitched them how cool it was or how much money you can make. That's the worst. That's the worst one, truly. And drop a lot of money, get all excited about this stuff, and then some of the realities hit you. The work it takes hits you. The competition aspect of it as well. If you're, especially like today, if you're entering the ball python industry, you are at the bottom of the totem pole below thousands of breeders who have been doing it, some instances for decades. So, the ability to stand out doing that is virtually impossible these days. And any of the genes or the morphs or whatever that one would be able to get to stand out, they're obviously being kind of, gate kept by the ones who are doing it at the highest level and have been for a long time, and rightfully so. It's their market, and they know what they're doing. They've been making a lot of money doing it for a long time. So I never really wanted to be a part of that rat race, so to speak. To me, it always seemed like the cooler thing to do is to start your own thing, get a project going from the ground up that is unique to yourself, or if not unique to yourself, something that is being pursued by a smaller group of people, and kind of be on the grassroots of it. So, like, for instance, I think anyone who's watching or listening to this would know that the scrub pythons are my main project, the thing that I'm the most passionate about. And I certainly wasn't the first person to breed scrub pythons or be really into scrub pythons. They had been bred for decades before I ever got into them. But when I was kind of approaching this as, okay, this might be the thing that I actually take and try to make into something, I just knew that my voice had to be the loudest to be noticed for it. And that really goes for anything. And that's not to discount other people who have done it, or to try to pretend like you have discovered this new species or whatever it is. But to take it and promote it on a new level that it hasn't ever been before. The way that I see it, a good way to approach finding whatever this may be for you, not only, you got to check the box of something you actually enjoy. This is probably not something that one would venture into for the first 5, maybe even 10 years of keeping reptiles, because how would you know, without trying out different species, without experimenting with what is interesting to you, there's truly no way to actually know what this will actually look like for you, what will be truly interesting, what will keep your attention for a long time, something that you actually are going to feel passionate about promoting, something that won't be just a pitch to you, something that will be a true belief that you are trying to communicate outward. So the likelihood of actually finding that early on in your reptile career is pretty low. If you do, wonderful. I'm not saying it's not possible, but for me, by the time I found scrub pythons, I had been keeping for, probably 8 years or so. And I kind of found it through a process of working with lots of different python species. I kind of always gravitated towards pythons, from green trees to olives to Timors and white lips and Papuan pythons. I kind of worked my way up, so to speak, to what, as I had done more research and looked into it, kind of felt to me like the pinnacle of the pythons were the scrub pythons. And once I started learning about all of the variety and the different species and everything, I really saw this opportunity for a snake that could be a whole hell of a lot more popular than it was at the current moment. And the reason why I thought this, and this can be applied to anything, is that I felt that they filled a void in the market that was ready to be fulfilled. And that was of a larger species of snake that was more manageable in a reasonable setting, didn't need a massive enclosure, was, let's say, bigger than a carpet python, but smaller than a Burmese python, and that didn't have any national level legislation going on about them. So that has always been the kind of elephant in the room with reticulated pythons, is that they're listed on the Lacey Act. And what I think a lot of people don't understand about the ruling on the Lacey Act, they weren't removed from the Lacey Act. Burmese pythons weren't removed from the Lacey Act. The interpretation of the language in the bill was changed, or was, it was reinterpreted on a legal level, and therefore the ruling of restriction of interstate commerce was reversed. That piece of legislation is still there, and who's to say it can't be reversed again? We've seen, big thank you to US ARC for doing that for this industry and fighting that case, from 2012 into about 2016 and 2017. It was quite the battle. But to me, that there was always that vulnerability, and as the dwarf and super dwarf reticulated python craze started to boil up around 2017, 2018 or so, I saw that this lane of the scrub pythons could be the perfect alternative to these snakes, where it's not necessarily a choose between one or the other. It's, if you're the kind of customer who's in this market, this could be another project that could very much spark your interest, and also from a business standpoint act as a bit of a safety net in case something does happen and now your investment into these reticulated pythons ends up becoming nothing overnight, which we saw happen back in 2012 when the constrictors were listed on the Lacey Act. Burmese pythons really have never quite recovered from it. Reticulated pythons definitely did, but Burmese pythons were extremely popular prior to 2012, and their popularity truly has never come back to the level it was prior to the listing. African rock pythons the same way. Green anacondas, I feel like, kind of stayed where they were. Where then with reticulated pythons, with the introduction of the dwarf, super dwarf locality types, all the morph crosses and all that, that one really took the forefront. So, and a perfect example, just like the scrub pythons, of a void in the market that was ready to be fulfilled, and that was in the more manageable size reticulated python, where anybody who was into reptiles from the 90s on, you were familiar with all the morphs of reticulated pythons, and they're the longest theoretically snake species in the world, all this stuff, all the albinos and the tiger, sunfire, golden child, all of these morphs that are truly beautiful, but realistically speaking, probably a fraction of 1% of the population of the world that keeps reptiles can legitimately house one of those animals. So the solution being, hey, there are these island types that get 8 feet, 9 feet long. What if we can somehow take these color variations, shrink them down into this more manageable package, and now people who are fascinated by these snakes can actually work with them on a more reasonable level, where an 8 or 9 foot snake, that percentage of the population that can keep them greatly increases over that 16, 18 foot snake naturally. So again, perfect example of an opening in the market and a way to fulfill that. The only downside of that though with the reticulated pythons was in the deception that occurred with the marketing, and really still does today, of promoting that these snakes will get 4 or 5 feet long as adults, or promoting of bloodlines that were never actually substantiated, yada yada yada. I've spoken on this before. So a great example of a project that fulfilled a need in the market, but then also improper execution of, that, let's say that that fraction of a fraction of 1% that could keep a mainland retic becomes 20% of the population of reptile enthusiasts, for example, when that snake is shrunk down to 8 feet. Well, if you can convince those people that that snake is actually going to get 5 feet long, then that opens up that conversation to probably 70 to 80% of people. And that is just not the case. Those snakes, there's a difference between reproductive size and adult size. And those lines are blurred. So with that said, that's not what this conversation is about, but great example of a screw up in the marketing that had long-term implications on the project. And it didn't kill the project, but it definitely scared some people away and upset some people who invested a lot of money in it up front. Back to the notes. So yeah, when you're looking at that niche, the size of the animal is very important. Who is your market? What is this an alternative to? Are there animals that have similar care requirements to a common species that a newer species or whatnot could fulfill as well? And then what makes these animals different? Do they have different morphs to them? Are they variable naturally? Are there different locality types? Are there different characteristics with their behavior that are particularly fascinating? These are all things to consider, but also things that you wouldn't then therefore need to communicate effectively as the person who is behind the project. And I'll get more into that later. Another great example of a project that fulfilled a need is that of the tree monitors. So, monitor lizards, goes without saying how amazing monitor lizards are. As kids, we all know about Komodo dragons. We all read the books in school and whatnot. And it's hard to not look at a monitor lizard and be fascinated. Well, paralleled in timeline and also in kind of who was doing it to the reticulated pythons, water monitors were heavily bred and marketed and promoted in the 90s and 2000s, 2010s. And the truth of the matter is, most people have absolutely no business keeping a water monitor, but many people did. Same thing with, Nile monitors or savannas that you find at shows. There's more monitor lizards went into collections and did not live a full life than any of us would ever like to admit. So these tree monitors, a few people, and I would say the first person who I would credit as really taking the reins for the tree monitor project would be Brandon Van Asten, Canadian cold blood, breeding blue tree monitors, green tree monitors, yellow tree monitors. And then they were coming into the US through Jordan Russell, and Jordan would distribute them throughout the US to whoever was in the market for them. And these captive bred tree monitors, as people were finding out, if you interact with them and socialize them from a young age, they can grow up to actually have fairly decent temperaments, which was one of the aspects of water monitors that was really appealing to people, is that they had good attitudes on occasions of individuals that were worked really well when they were younger. So you see YouTube videos of your favorite influencer people with their water monitors or their black dragon water monitors that are super calm, like, big scaly dogs. And, you think you want that for yourself. Well, it didn't always work out that way. Either you realize quickly how big they get and how you don't have space for it, or, hey, my water monitor isn't really friendly, and now this is actually a dangerous animal to me. Or you realize how expensive it is to feed a monitor that's that big and that grows as much as they do. Something that is often overlooked by people who are breeding and selling monitors is just the cost of maintaining those monitors. But then shrink it down into this little tree monitor that's, primarily an insectivore. And now you have something that's much more manageable for lots of people, something that can be reasonably kept as a one individual in like a 4x2x4 enclosure its entire life. So, a 4x2x4 is a shipping crate for some bigger water monitors. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but not that much. So Brandon was one of the first people who was really doing it. And then on the US side, kind of a little bit of a throwback to the beginning of the video, Brian Susan from Sundown Reptiles really took that ball and ran with it as far as taking the tree monitor game to the next level. And not only, having success breeding these lizards that had previously been considered a difficult species to produce in captivity, but, providing the top quality animals possible to the people in the US market. And it's no surprise why tree monitors have taken off so much in the US, really everywhere, but particularly the US, the way that they have, is that they fulfilled that very specific need of, okay, people like monitor lizards, but the ones that are bred consistently in captivity are really not good for most people. So how do we find something that is a compromise, still beautiful, still engaging all of the monitor lizard traits that so many people want, but in a size that's actually manageable for a majority of keepers? And that's, that was very much accomplished. And now captive bred tree monitors they're not an uncommon thing to find at a show or find online. Obviously someone like Brian is doing an incredible job producing a large volume of them relative to, historical standards. But there are a handful of other people as well who have now gotten to the point, Corey Martin's another one. I'll give her a shout out, a great breeder who's producing some amazing tree monitors and fulfilling that need. I mean, a captive bred black tree monitor is basically just a tiny, more slender, climbing, more arboreal black dragon. So that animal right there fulfills the need to a T that the market was kind of was waiting for. So something like that is a perfect example of kind of what I'm saying. One thing I've said this over and over again, but one complex of animals that I feel like somebody could very easily take the ball and run with would be the beauty snake complex. So, be it blue beauties, Taiwan beauties, Chinese beauties, and then cave racers, Mullendorf rat snakes. They're larger colubrids, which there are not too many of, relatively speaking, if you proportion out, the thousands of species of colubrids. They do well in captivity. There are many captive bred lineages. They're extremely variable. They're beautiful snakes. They're fun to interact with. You can set up display enclosures for them. You can keep them in racks. They're really hardy under a lot of different circumstances. And there are tons of different color variations within not only individual species, but then the complex as a whole. The Gabrowski rat snakes as well, the Sumatrans, those are, one of the newer additions to what we have in captivity of those snakes. So for something like that could be, a snake that could run parallel to, the more popular bull snakes and pine snakes that we have a lot of in the US and that a lot of people have been working with for a long time. So just things like that, finding those, finding the little lanes you can kind of make your own. So when it comes down to the actual marketing of it, this is where you have to be careful, because you're going to want to be the loudest voice, the one who's speaking the most, but then you have to make sure to not be annoying, not sound like you're talking down to people, not have this like expert complex about yourself, and don't do it before you're ready. So, before being that mouthpiece, you better know everything that there is to know that is accessible about the animals. You got to be good at making your own observations, learning behavior, learning care, learning things that can be actionable to other keepers. And then not immediately developing an ego surrounding it as well. I learn new things about scrub pythons every day. There's everyone, the people who are doing this at the highest level are constantly learning, and they're not afraid to be wrong either. So if you are planning on, okay, this is my project, this is what I want to do with it, you got to check your ego at the door. Otherwise you're not going to get very far. So a lot of research, put the time in with the animals and really understand them before you start to talk about it. And then once you start to talk about it, again, don't come at it like I'm the expert, I know everything, listen to me. Really just, it's more or less as a documentation of your time experiencing these animals. And people will want to learn and grow with you if you are engaging enough with your content. One thing that I've found is very helpful, it also with the Tree Monitor project very much helped that as well, is lots of promoting content where you are interacting with the animal. There's lots of species that have bad reputations of being aggressive or defensive or whatever you want to say. And frankly, a defensive species can only really go so far as to a potential for marketability, because the amount of people who want a snake that they have to always kind of be on their toes with, it's minimal compared to the entirety of the market as a whole. Of people who say watch this podcast or the other ones on the channel, we all might be ahead of the curve on that, where something like that doesn't really bother us much anymore, and the experience of that animal is what's most valuable. That's going to be a smaller portion of the population. Like with the reticulated pythons, the early wild caught animals were not friendly, but through captive breeding, through selectivity, now they're the puppy dogs that we know of today. So it really is possible with most species, but that's another aspect of this where you gotta have that patience. Sometimes you got to be able to, maybe my project won't even blow up until I'm at my second generation. You don't really know. And that's where having something you truly care about comes into play, because you don't want to be, 4 years in and be like, man, this isn't going as quickly as I would have liked to. I want to get out of this. This isn't whatever. Now you've wasted your time. You haven't done right by the animals. And it's just a negative every way you can look at it. So again, to emphasize, the most important part of this is having it be a species or a species complex that really matters to you, no matter what it is, to where if you're not making any money on it at all, you're perfectly content doing it because you would be anyway, given how much you enjoy the animals. Let's see, back to the notes. Yeah, okay. Here I am. We're back. So one mistake that I see made frequently with marketing a project is that of kind of the ratio of ads to non-ads. You'll find people online where, damn near every day you're seeing an ad for something available, and that can work for certain people, but then you kind of already need to have an established clientele for that to even be possible. Because if you're some random person who doesn't have, brand recognition or whatever you want to call it, and you're posting your animals up for sale, what incentive does anyone ever have in that instance to buy from you? What do you provide them that the 5 to 10 to 20 other people who one could go to for that same animal provide as well? And that's where creating some of that recognition really comes into handy, where if you are present on social media, be it Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, but particularly YouTube. YouTube is a really important one. Then not only are you marketing your animals, you're also marketing yourself. And I know for me, when I've acquired animals, it's a much more fulfilling process when I'm getting an animal that not only I really have wanted, I really, keeping them has been a goal of mine, but from somebody who I've looked up to and whose information has helped me get to the point of being comfortable to keep these animals. So, and that creates repeat customers. That gives then a situation to where you have a customer who has been very happy with, an animal or two they've gotten from you. They're going to recommend you to somebody else, really just creating reputation for yourself. That face to the name, it really does matter a lot. So if you are trying to promote your project by posting up ads on Facebook or Morph Market or Fauna or whatever, good luck. Really good luck in today's day and age. The only real way that could be possible from a purely sales promotion standpoint is if you are doing local reptile shows, and that's super limiting, just considering the nature of today with shipping and the internet. And especially if you're producing any sort of volume of these animals, you're going to run out of local clientele at some point. At some point you will. So getting that out there into the ether of the internet, despite how some of us might not like it all the time, unfortunately, it's a necessity these days. And what I was saying about YouTube being important, and I'm kind of guilty of this, so it's a little bit ironic that I'll be saying how important it is. But the people who are the most successful, especially when it comes to selling animals that don't already have an established market or have a smaller established market, is making YouTube videos. One person who I think does it potentially the best of anyone right now is Gary Scavino, GS Reptiles. And not only is Gary an extremely charismatic and well educated, he's a legend in the game. He's somebody who anyone should look up to for information about green trees and carpets and emerald tree boas and all that stuff. But his videos are really fun to watch, and he shows the animals in a really great light. There isn't the sensationalism bullshit aspect, but it's also not boring. There's a lot of people who don't really think that there's a middle ground between sensationalist content, bite videos, yada, yada, and boring videos. Well, Gary is somebody who bridges that gap exceptionally well. And it showed, the results speak for themselves, where, Gary has some animals and he makes them available, and you're lucky if you even know how much they would have cost you before they're gone. So that's also, it's not only his YouTube videos, but it's decades of doing this and having a reputation that is spotless. But then that coupled with content that can reach new people on a platform like YouTube will be a really killer combo for not only selling animals, but promoting the animals you work with. In 2020, I doubt many people even knew what a green Sanzinia was before Gary was talking about them on his videos. And when those animals ended up being available and selling, they fetched a pretty high price point and never needed to see a public sale, because there was enough people, primarily through Gary's videos, who were ready to drop big money on those snakes, because he had done such a great job of promoting why they are as incredible as they are. And that it's another aspect of this that with a newer project is really important. Any sale that can be converted by means that are not posting a snake for sale, that's like as good as making two sales. Because for one, the way that I see it, if you can have somebody reach out to you, hey, I love your content, I love your videos, I'm interested in such and such, can I ask you some questions about it? Can I see your setups? Do you have any pictures of what's available? That alone is going to weed out a majority of bad customers, people who don't want to have your animals, because, and it's not going to be a foolproof system, but if somebody is taking the time to reach out, potentially without knowing if there's anything available to begin with, that person has done the research. They've clearly consumed your content. And if you're doing it well enough, you've, through that content, taught them what they need to know to be successful with that species. And, coming to you directly, asking a lot of questions, you have a much greater ability to ensure that that animal is going to a place that it's going to be well taken care of. Whereas you compare it to like a reptile show or a sale off of a third-party site, you can be lied to, and there's only so much vetting one really can do when it comes to selling reptiles, which is just an unfortunate reality of our industry. But a great way to eliminate some of the customers you don't want to have your animals is to create scenarios where they will reach out to you first. I've almost never sold an animal that way and then later on been like, oh shoot, wow, I really sent that animal to the wrong person. And those videos are a great way to do that. I bet, because Gary's videos they aren't always posting animals for sale. He definitely will have videos where animals are available, but it's not every single one. Another great example of that, and this example really can't apply to everybody, and it just is what it is, but it's a great testament as to what is truly possible. During the pandemic, obviously that was one of the highest points in the history of the industry. I remember conversations that I had with Brian Barczyk where he was explaining how popular his egg cutting videos were of his ball python clutches, and he would post a video, post a vlog that had a couple egg cutting clutches in it, and every single one of those ball pythons would sell off of those videos without even without any sort of information to say that these animals are available. People would contact the sales department and be like, hey, is the one from this timestamp at this video from this egg available? Because I want that snake. And the reason why I say not everybody can do that is that definitely, without a question, not everybody is Brian Barczyk or even can be. That's what happens when you have, not only decades in the industry, but over a decade of building a brand for yourself from a public standpoint, in this case on YouTube, and providing content to where people can learn about the animals, learn how to keep the animals, and then they have that personal connection to where they want an animal from him specifically. So, and obviously that coinciding with the extreme boom in the reptile industry was just a perfect opportunity for that type of capitalization on that market. And really, Brian was an exceptional example of how just talking about an animal and showing how much you really care about an animal can create a market just on its own. One that I point to frequently was that of blue-tongue skinks. Blue-tongue skinks have always been a very popular pet, for decades. They're arguably the best lizard pet in the world. And Brian was certainly not the first person to keep them, breed them, talk about them. But considering how good of a communicator he was and the size of the platform he had, when he got into blue-tongue skinks, that market erupted in the US. And shoot, I didn't ever get quite into to the point of buying them, but I was very interested in blue-tongue skinks. I was, doing my research on them, listening to podcasts about them. Probably this had to be 2015, 16 or so. Morelia Python Radio did a few great episodes on blue-tongue skinks, and I listened to those multiple times over. All of this just because Brian showed these animals in videos and showed how awesome they were. He didn't even have any to sell. He was building his collection at the time. So he didn't even benefit from this financially as far as selling blue tongue skinks at the time, because that wasn't what he was doing. But what's funny about it, that's not, I mean, it is funny, but it does show how impactful something like that can be. Another major player in the industry who I'm not going to say his name. I just don't know if he'd want his name out there in this context, but he had also, he breeds blue tongue skinks as well. And after a period of time, Brian was kind of hadn't been making as much blue tongue skink content for no particular reason. And this other guy in the industry reached out to Brian and was like, hey, why aren't you making the blue tongue videos anymore? The market hasn't been nearly as hot as it was when you were making those videos. And that to me is just like, it speaks volumes to where one person who is public and vocal about how much they love these animals and why they're passionate about this particular species can drive an entire market for sellers who are not even associated with them, and just build that groundswell of attention. So hearing that, really early, I was probably 18 or so when he told me that story, that really showed me like, okay, this just putting your words out there, putting your face forward, really, it carries so much weight compared to the alternative. And the amount of people who kind of relied on people like Brian to promote their animals for them is crazy. And it's not always something that you can fault everybody on. Not everybody has the ability to, do it full time, or like Brian, have like a videography team. So, this is all within reason, because life does have limitations. But if you are trying to do it at the most proficient level possible, there are levels to which you need to rise to be able to do that. And yeah, Lisa, Jeff from JMG, absolutely. It's a great example with hognose snakes and fat-tailed geckos. Jeff is someone else who I'm very happy to call a friend. One of the most successful people in the history of the industry, without question. And particularly the hognose snake market would not be anything like it is today without him. So it's absolutely the case. I mean, his social media is pretty big. Even all the memes that he does, as goofy as you might think they are, that's impactful. And showing these snakes in kind of a funny, whimsical light, so to speak, that can reach people who are not currently keeping. And that is, as I spoke about in a previous solo episode, that's the biggest thing that we have as a collective industry have suffered from in the last year after losing Brian, is just the amount of people that are, the flow, the intake of new keepers has decreased dramatically. And there's a lot of factors for that. But one of the primary factors is absolutely not having Brian's voice out there anymore. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Emily and Ed of Snake Discovery. They were probably the number 2 behind Brian while he was still around, as far as outreach to new people. And obviously they're still doing their thing. So, big shout out to them. But the impact of Brian is very apparent. And I think everybody is suffering because of that. So just another hurdle that we all have to overcome collectively. But with all that said, I say all this not to say that this is how you become successful, or how to have a successful project just of your own. Because you can also come into a market that is already established and, make a lane for yourself as well. But that needs to be done tactfully. So a thing that, ball python breeders particularly, and even leopard gecko breeders, whatever it may be, have struggled from is kind of that, you know, I like what I like because I saw a Justin Kabelka video about it, or whatever. Not to pick on them, but for good reason. Justin and his team, they've marketed ball pythons better than anyone ever has. So it's pretty easy to see why somebody would want to structure their projects around what they're doing. But you also have to think about, all right, how am I going to stand out from people I'm buying from or from the other people who are in my market? So to kind of go back to some examples that I've been using for like the tree monitors, for instance, if you want to come into the tree monitor market and compete with somebody like Brian Susan, if you're going to do what he does, you just have to hope that there are more customers in the market than he can fulfill. Because if there aren't, they're going to him, or they're going to Corey, or people who are already established breeding these animals. So how do you, as somebody who is new, stand out from everybody else? Well, what I would see from that standpoint is taking one species of tree monitors and really trying to perfect a certain aspect of those. Like, for instance, trying to breed yellow tree monitors for the most vibrant yellow or the least amount of black pattern. I'm just hypothetically speaking, because, and not that people like Brian aren't producing the most incredible animals that they are, but if somebody has a more generalized collection where he's got all the tree monitors, then inevitably one of those projects can probably be taken to a level that he isn't working on because that's just not his focus. Or like, for instance, with scrub pythons, there's plenty of people who are breeding scrub pythons, but there are still many lanes that are not fully tapped yet. For instance, the Wamena Jayapura scrub pythons, they're bred by a handful of people, but nobody has really taken that ball and run with it as far as, extreme like line breeding or focusing on certain traits, visual traits within that type. Or, for instance, like the Orange Highland scrub pythons, a locality type that we still do see imports of on a more regular basis than some others. So, lower and less expensive wild caught animals are available of that type. And if somebody put together a collection of 12 import Orange Highland scrub pythons, give it 5 or 6 years, and you're at the top of the heap with that locality type. And that can really apply to almost anything. It's, again, without compromising what actually interests you, how do I find a lane that will actually set me apart from the people who have established themselves, who I'm not taking them out, nor should you want to either. That's, I'm very much a believer in high tide raises all ships, especially when it comes to reptile breeding. So, but what can I do to expand the horizons of this project, create a lane that hasn't been discovered yet, and, be able to actually be prominent and not just a year or 2 or 5 behind whoever's in front of me. Kind of cut the line, so to speak, with a cool new twist on a project. And then kind of the final thing that I've seen people do that works actually fairly well, and especially in the context of a more local market, is species that have kind of seen their heyday, so to speak, or markets that exploded and then died down and now are kind of at a medium simmer kind of spot. I think 2 perfect examples of that would be corn snakes and leopard geckos. two of historically the absolute most popular, most widespread kept reptiles in the entire world. And many different morphs, major markets with massive breeders that, many of them are still in operation. But I think everybody who is observing those two markets will you can't not admit that they are 5 to 10 years past their prime, probably closer to 10. And I think projects, one in each of the species, kind of marked the end of the golden era, so to speak. With corn snakes, I would say that was the palmetto, and then with leopard geckos, I'd say the lemon frost, for two entirely different reasons. The palmetto, I would say, is a better reason. And I think honestly, it was just because that project was marketed so well. It was, and I've talked about this on a previous episode, but the way that project was rolled out, it was really so great. It was like, you can't really top this. And then with, legislation tightening up on some places where these were collected in the past, new morphs not really hitting the scene as much, and really, I think more a movement towards ball pythons after the palmetto project kind of ran its course, so to speak. Then corn snakes kind of flatlined. And then with leopard geckos, the lemon frost gene hit the scene, and it had, as people probably know, pretty massive defect to where most, if not all, lemon frost animals developed cancer at some point in time, and it wasn't anything that could be bred out or whatever. And a lot of people invested a lot of money into lemon frost and were just totally shit out of luck. I think that kind of knocked the wind out of the sails of the leopard gecko market. And at the same time, crested geckos, gargoyles, Leachiana, Shahua, the New Caledonian stuff, that was really taking off. So I think a lot of the gecko focus that was on leopard geckos before was now moved over to Rhacodactylus, or whatever the fuck they are now. I don't pay attention to any of that, but all the New Caledonian stuff. And the thing about a species like corn snakes or leopard geckos is that they're never not going to be the best pet reptile. And there will always be a demand for that beginner snake. So the way that I see it with projects like that, the day and age of mass produce what you can, wholesale, it's going to go somewhere. That's probably, it'll still be there, but that probably won't be the most fruitful approach. The way that I see it is if you can take those the snakes or the lizards, and really fine tune them, select the morphs very specifically, get the best examples, and just produce the cream of the crop of those species, there's going to be a market for them. If you are promoting it properly, you can kind of revive that market a little bit in a space where the popularity was once very high. Now it is not, but it is still a cornerstone species of our industry. I see that as a very, viable path towards success. And there are people who are doing it. Burmese pythons have kind of been the same way, where there are now a smaller handful of people that are really, breeding the top end Burmese pythons. The pieds had come out post Lacey Act, and people have done very well with the pieds and the Burmese pythons. So, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it, but you can start something brand new or get on a trend early on. But then there's also the other way of finding a species that has kind of fallen off, so to speak, and revitalizing it. Because at that point you don't need to promote those animals as far as the virtues of why you should keep them, because it's very well established. You don't need to tell somebody why a corn snake or a leopard gecko makes a great pet, but creating that new visibility, reminding people that these animals even exist, remind them why they're so amazing. That to me, I see it as a really viable path to success. So yeah, let's see. I'll look at my notes to see if I missed anything that I wanted to talk on. I think that's really about it. There's definitely going to be more about this. Yeah, Randy, exactly. Like Amazons. I think Amazon tree boas have always been a species that never really fully got the appreciation that they deserve, and people like you and people like Jeremy that are very vocal and public about their Amazons and are sharing them frequently. That creates a market. The Amazon tree boa market is leaps and bounds ahead of where it was 10 years ago, just because a small group of people really became passionate about them and did a very good job at communicating that. Like another great example is Morelia Python Radio, with how they promoted carpet pythons. That there's an entire community basically built around that podcast and around those snakes in the US and reach around the world. So there's a lot of good examples out there of how this can be done well, and also done in a way that respects and honors the animals as well. Because I know we don't need to talk about all the breeders that have taken advantage of the animals over time and have prioritized profits over care and mass produced for the sake of another, an extra dollar. And then, beyond just the integrity standpoint, just the impact on the animals, how many animals were, never made it to adulthood, that were born in retic puppy mills or ball python puppy mills or whatever it may be. The way that I see it for longevity of this hobby, that model isn't too sustainable. So the more people that can be really passionate behind a project that they love, promote it from that place, and do right by the animals, we're in a good spot. I'd love to be able to see, in 10 years, a reptile show that is, maybe the species with the most representation is 20% of the show. Where table to table, you see the highest quality captive bred animals of hundreds of different species of reptiles and amphibians, frogs and salamanders and geckos and agamids and monitors, pythons, boas, colubrids, the whatever it may be. So yeah, I think it's a good little point to wrap up on. And I hope everyone just keep yourself open-minded, always learn about new animals, and be open to new experiences. So that's what really makes this industry and this hobby as amazing as it is. So with all that said, thank you to everybody who has been tuning in live so far tonight. Also, thank you to everybody who caught this after the fact, either on YouTube or Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts from. Please subscribe here to the Trap Talk Reptile Network on YouTube. New podcast every single day of the week. Also on Spotify, Apple, Buzzsprout, all of your audio platforms. For me, you can find me on Instagram at Scrub Shepherd, Stephen Kush on Facebook. If you want to inquire about available animals, hit me up on either of those platforms. And yeah, that's the episode. So thank you guys again for tuning in. Have a very happy Thanksgiving, and I will catch everyone back here next week.